Okay, let's unpack a truly wild paradox.
Mm.
How do you possibly conquer something
Hmm.
that is, by its very nature, unconquerable?
Right.
And not just something, but the supreme. I mean, it sounds impossible.
It completely flips our usual understanding, doesn't it? Power, mastery. This is something else entirely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that impossible-sounding idea is where we're starting our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We've got these sources centered around some incredibly ancient prayers.
From the Srimad Bhagavatam, right? Verses 6.16.46 and 47.
Thousands of years old. Seriously ancient stuff.
And what's key, I think, is that it's not just the verses. We have these layers of commentary, too. You know, the purports by Srila Prabhupada.
Right, which make it more accessible for today.
Exactly. And then the Krama Sandarbha by Srila Jiva Goswami, which is a much older, deeper philosophical take.
Gotcha. So these layers really unpack the insight.
They do. They show these aren't just hymns. They're like sophisticated documents
That's right.
full of psychological, philosophical depth.
Okay, so our mission here is to kind of pull out the real nuggets from all this material.
Yeah, see how these ancient ideas maybe anticipated modern science, psychology?
And what practical wisdom they might actually offer us, today.
We're trying to give you that shortcut, really,
Yeah.
to understanding this ancient stuff and why it still matters.
Right, so let's dive in. These prayers. Text 46. It starts with this incredible humility, doesn't it? Acknowledging God's omniscience.
It puts it right out there. Whatever a living entity does is well known to you because you are the supersoul.
Nothing's hidden at all.
That's the core idea. You're completely seen.
And the metaphor it uses,
Mm-hmm.
comparing our knowledge to God's.
Wow.
It's striking, isn't it? In the presence of the sun, there is nothing to be revealed by the light of a glowworm.
The glowworm.
Yeah. And the Krama Sandarbha commentary, it makes it even simpler. Our knowledge, in comparison of yours, is like a firefly's light compared to the sun's.
A firefly versus the sun. That just slams it home, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Our tiny, finite knowledge against, well, infinite awareness. Totally. And it really underscores that humility, that surrender from the speaker. In your presence, there's nothing for me to make known. Like, what could I possibly tell you?
Yeah, what's the point? It emphasizes that huge difference in perspective. Okay, so then text 47 shifts a bit.
It does. It addresses the supreme directly, creator, maintainer, and annihilator. The whole cosmic picture.
But then it pivots to a critique, right, of a certain viewpoint.
Yes, it points out that people who are too materialistic, and especially those who always see separateness, Kira, they just can't grasp God's real position.
They see separateness. What does that mean exactly?
It means they look at the universe, all its parts, and they conclude it just exists on its own, independent. They don't see the connection, the underlying source or unity.
Ah, okay. They miss the big picture because they're focused on the pieces.
You got it. And the purport commentary on this, it really doesn't pull any punches.
No kidding. It talks about atheists thinking it's all chance and materialistic scientists or philosophers deliberately avoiding God's name.
And it says their knowledge, because of this atheistic temperament, is basically null and void. Pretty strong language.
Yeah. And it contrasts that view with the Supreme, who's called Paramahasa.
The supreme pure. And the Kama Sandarbha adds that this reality is hard to understand by the false yogis who see with difference, pida.
There's that word again, bida. Seeing difference, separateness.
Mm-hmm.
That seems key to the whole problem being described.
It really is. It suggests the barrier isn't intellectual horsepower, maybe, but a fundamental way of perceiving reality itself.
Okay, so we've got the scene, humility before omniscience, and this critique of seeing only separation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, back to that paradox we started with. How on earth do you conquer the unconquerable?
Right. This is where it gets really fascinating. The sources, especially drawing from commentary on a later verse, Srimad Bhagavatam 10.1.3, they lay out this paradox.
Okay.
The Supreme Lord can't be beaten by force, can't be figured out just by thinking really hard, but he is conquered completely
By whom? How?
by those who surrender to him with pure devotional love.
Wait. Surrender.
Yeah.
To conquer. That feels so backward to how we usually think about achieving anything. Control, dominance.
Totally counterintuitive. And the source explains the way it works isn't through, mental gymnastics or brute force. It's through that pure devotional love,
Okay, pure love.
which means surrendering fully, body, words, and mind. Tanuva manopi. It's an integrated act, your whole being involved.
Wow. Body, words, and mind. And commentary gives this, two-sided view of the conquest.
Yeah, Srila Sanatana Goswami explains it brilliantly. First, from the devotee side, The devotee conquers Krishna
Ha.
by becoming so close, so dear through that love, that they can actually touch his feet, call him with their words, hold him in their mind just by thinking. They gain that intimacy.
They conquer him with affection, basically.
You could say that. And then the flip side. Krishna conquers the devotees.
Okay, how does that work?
He's apparently so overwhelmed by their love for him that he stays right beside them, he praises them, he thinks about them constantly, he's captivated.
That's an amazing image. The Supreme being captivated by his devotees' love.
It is. And the commentary makes a sharp contrast with others, those not in that loving service.
What about them?
It says basically no matter how hard they try, bodily strength, verbal expertise, or mental power, they just can't conquer the absolute truth. It remains beyond their reach.
All that effort for nothing in that sense.
Right. And Vishwanatha Chakravarti, Akura, adds another layer about Namanta, offering obeisances, using body, words, and mind to show respect. Respect for the teachings, like Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, and for those who share them. That's part of the surrender.
You know, this ancient idea, it actually sounds weirdly familiar when you look at some modern research.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Like Jim Collins' work on leadership, level 5 leadership. He talks about the greatest leaders not being the big ego types, but those with fierce resolve combined with deep personal humility, serving something bigger than themselves.
That fits perfectly. Power through service, not domination. It's the same principle, isn't it? Influence comes from serving a greater cause.
Exactly. And maybe even in psychology, like flow states.
Absolutely. Research on flow or self-transcendence. Peak experiences often happen when the ego kind of dissolves, right? When you're
That's it.
lost in a task or feel part of something larger.
That sounds exactly like what these texts are describing. Ego dissolution through surrender, which then allows this connection or conquest that wasn't possible before.
It's like they were mapping the psychology of transcendence thousands of years ago with surprising precision way before we had terms like flow state.
Okay, so they weren't just talking theology, they were describing a real psychological dynamic. Amazing. That leads us right into some other key insights you found that seem way ahead of their time. What about this source problem?
Yeah, this is a great one. The ancient texts basically ask this question that feels so modern, like something you'd hear in physics or philosophy today.
Okay, what's the question?
It's essentially, okay, scientists can build amazing things like airplanes, great. But where did the intelligence to figure that out come from? And where did the actual stuff, the materials, come from in the first place?
Oh, so they're looking beyond the immediate creation. They're asking about the origin of the ability to create and the substance itself, the ultimate source.
Exactly. And doesn't that feel a lot like what philosopher David Chalmers calls the hard problem of consciousness?
Remind me.
How does subjective experience, the feeling of what it's like to be me, how does that arise from just physical stuff like brain chemistry? We can describe the mechanics, but not the inner feeling itself.
Right. The what it's like part is the mystery.
So the ancients were wrestling with a similar fundamental gap, weren't they, between the physical world and where its intelligence or awareness comes from.
Interesting. It's the same kind of deep question about origins.
Totally. And our sources even bring in that quote attributed to Leonardo da Vinci. We know more about the movement of celestial bodies than about the soil underfoot. Even he recognized that the stuff closest to us, the most fundamental reality, can be the hardest to truly grasp.
Wow. Okay, let's shift to another really evocative idea, the womb metaphor.
Yes. This teaching describes the soul inside the womb as having this state of pure, unclouded consciousness before all the social conditioning kicks in.
Pure consciousness.
Yeah. And there's this incredibly powerful prayer in the Bhagavatam where the soul is basically begging, let me just stay here in this pure state. Don't let me fall into the blind well of material life.
The blind well. That's intense imagery. Losing sight, getting lost. How does that connect to, say, modern neuroscience?
Well, think about neuroplasticity. We know our brains are constantly being shaped, literally rewired by our experiences, our environment, our interactions, especially early on.
Right. Social conditioning is real.
It really is. Our culture, our upbringing, they effectively program our neural pathways. They shape how we see the world, who we think we are.
So the ancients, with this metaphor of falling from purity into a confusing well, they were basically describing consciousness getting programmed by external stuff.
That's how it seems, yeah. They understood, maybe intuitively, How much the material environment shakes us, conditions our consciousness, forms our identity. It's like they were anticipating the whole nature versus nurture debate, focusing on the power of nurture or conditioning.
That's incredible foresight. Okay, another huge idea you flagged was this concept of post-tribal spirituality. Sounds intriguing.
This is really core to what the texts call Bhagavata Dharma. It's presented not as just another religion, but as a kind of universal spiritual path.
Universal how? What makes it different?
Well, its central idea, surrender to God, is framed as a truth anyone can access, regardless of their background. The sources explicitly say things like, know your religion versus my religion.
And pretty radical, especially for ancient texts.
It really is, and its characteristics are just as striking. Followers are supposed to be not envious of anyone. They are friends to all beings. Imagine that. Universal friendship. And it emphasizes protecting all life equally. That's seen as a hallmark of true civilization. One quote says, a civilization that sees no difference between trees, animals, and humans.
That sounds incredibly relevant today, like modern environmental ethics almost.
Doesn't it? And the sources present this path as offering real solutions to the problems of their time, and maybe ours too. Problems like conflict, division.
And they contrast it with false religion.
Yes.
All right.
Any system that breeds envy, causes needless harm, like unnecessary animal sacrifices are mentioned, or just focuses on temporary material gain, that's condemned as missing the real point of spirituality.
So anything that pumps up the ego, creates division, causes harm, that's off track.
Pretty much. And there's this promise of real transformation, even through simple practices, like just hearing or chanting divine names, especially recommended for our current age, Kali Yuga, which is seen as spiritually challenging.
Simple practices leading to transformation.
Yeah, and it's said that even if you approach God with, say, material desires, the process itself purifies you. They use this analogy of frying seeds. Once fried, the seeds can't sprout anymore. Your material desires lose their power to create future problems.
You know, all this, it resonates with so many modern movements, doesn't it? Interfaith dialogue, deep ecology, servant leadership, they're all pushing towards unity, compassion, looking beyond narrow self-interest.
It really does feel like an ancient blueprint for a more, I don't know, globally conscious way of being.
It does, and you're saying these aren't just like interesting historical ideas, they have practical legs today.
That's the claim in the sources, yes.
Right.
They offer frameworks we can actually use.
Okay, well, like, again, give me some examples.
Well, environmental action, for instance, really internalizing our dependence on nature, seeing ourselves as protectors of all life, that flows directly from the Bhagavata Dharma ideal.
Okay, and leadership.
Back to the conquest paradox. True influence comes from service, humility, not just throwing your weight around. That's a leadership principle right there.
Right, mental health.
Finding your identity beyond just your job title, your social status, your achievements, connecting to something deeper. That relates back to transcending that material conditioning we talked about, the blind well.
I see. And global unity, obviously.
Yeah, that's the heart of it. A framework for getting past the us versus them mentality in religion, culture, everywhere.
So ancient wisdom offering very modern tools.
Exactly. And there's even a specific example in our sources of how these principles are being used right now as a kind of living technology.
Oh, tell me about that, a test case.
Yeah, it discusses a situation, a kind of crisis or disruption happening within some spiritual communities today. Maybe related to leadership, authority, how teachings are applied, a disharmony.
Okay, a real-world problem.
Described as dharmasa glani, a disruption of dharma, of the expected spiritual order.
And the ancient wisdom provides a way to handle this.
That's the fascinating part. It apparently offers a framework. There's this metaphor used. When you're mining for gold, you have to focus on the gold itself, not get distracted by all the conflicts happening around the mine.
Okay, focus on the essence, the spiritual goal.
Right. Don't get lost in the surrounding drama. And it offers pragmatic options, a system response framework drawn from the tradition. Tolerate, mitigate, or emigrate.
Tolerate, mitigate, emigrate.
Yeah.
Practical choices.
Yeah. So different people or groups facing this disruption can actually use these ancient principles to figure out their path, how to respond in a way that maintains spiritual integrity.
That is incredible. Literally 5,000-year-old wisdom providing diagnostic tools and strategies for 21st century problems. Wow.
It shows these texts aren't just dead history. They're active, intelligent frameworks you can use to navigate really complex situations.
This whole idea, separating the pure essence from the complexity. It reminds me of that beautiful metaphor you mentioned earlier, the one that keeps popping up in the sources, especially from the Manda section. The swan.
Ah, yes, the swan. It's such a perfect image for this.
Explain it again.
Well, you know the fable. Swans can supposedly separate milk from a mixture of milk and water.
Right, they take only the pure milk.
Exactly. So these prayers, this wisdom, they're like the swan. They help you extract the pure essence, pure consciousness, spiritual reality from the confusing mix of everyday material life.
Separating the signal from the noise.
Beautifully put. And the place where these swan-like souls find their milk, their nourishment, the descriptions are amazing. The lake of transcendental nectar.
Sounds nice.
Doesn't it? It's described as Krishna's divine activities, flowing like nectar streams, smelling like camphor, full of sweet buds. It's this reservoir of spiritual reality and divine love where these souls swim and feed.
Feeding the soul, not just the body.
Precisely. The source contrasts it with ordinary grains that just strengthen the body. This nectar nourishes the soul itself. And listen to this promise. If one drinks but a drop of this nectar, the body and mind begin to bloom, and one begins to laugh, sing, and dance.
Wow. That sounds like true vitality, true joy, coming from understanding from this nectar.
It does, and it's contrasted sharply with getting stuck in the pit of false arguments or whirlpools of unfortunate situations. Kutakagarte, places you avoid by having faith in this nourishing nectar.
So avoid the pits and whirlpools, drink the nectar.
That's the invitation. Turn towards what nourishes your consciousness, what brings expansion and joy, not confusion and distress.
So the invitation really is clear then. These ancient texts, these prayers, they're not just museum pieces. They are, as you said, living technology for consciousness transformation.
That's how they're presented. And available, supposedly, to anyone willing to dive deep.
Amazing. Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, it's been quite a journey. We've seen how these ancient prayers pack in some incredibly sophisticated ideas.
Yeah, psychological insights, philosophical depth, mapping consciousness, offering tools for change.
And anticipating modern science and psychology by, well, millennia. Offering frameworks for today's problems, even functioning as living wisdom in current crises.
We went from, omniscience and the critique of materialism through that mind-bending paradox of surrender, exploring how they foresaw ideas about consciousness, identity, even global unity.
All guided by these ancient texts and their commentaries.
Yeah, and it all comes back to that image, doesn't it? Our knowledge, a firefly, the wisdom available, the sun.
It's a powerful reminder. There's always so much more depth, so much more to learn if we're willing to look.
Which kind of leaves us with the final thought, really. Something pulled from the sources for you to chew on.
Okay, what is it?
The real question maybe isn't whether these ancient insights are true, but are we wise enough to actually learn from them?
Are we wise enough to learn? That's a good question to ponder. What does diving deep really mean for you after hearing all this? Something to think about.